Hello everyone, we'll be presenting to you on the topic of externalities. A quick run through of our outline for today. We'll be splitting up the presentation into two segments, positive and negative externalities. In both cases, we'll introduce each externality along with an example before proceeding to provide a solution to these externalities. Finally, we'll wrap up with an analysis of this solution. We'll start off with an introduction to externalities. A positive externality exists when benefits are enjoyed by third parties due to the consumption of goods or services. A negative externality exists when costs are borne by third parties due to the consumption of goods or services. Allow us to quickly break down what this definition means. Benefits are utility enjoyed, while costs are costs incurred, while third parties represent society as a whole, excluding the buyers and sellers of the goods and service in question. Let's take a look at what a cost-benefit graph looks like without any externalities. In a market without any externalities, the benefits and costs to the consumers and producers of the good or service is the benefits and costs to society. This is because there is no benefit or cost to third parties through the consumption or production of this good or service. We can see that the cost is upward sloping and the benefits is downward sloping. This resembles the demand and supply curve in a single good market that we have previously learned about. Now, let's take a look at the cost-benefit graph of a market with positive externalities, the market for research and development, or R&D for short. In this case, we assume that MPC equals to MSC. The costs in this market are the economic costs of producing R&D. The MPB is given by this line over here. This is the private benefit that the firm reaps when engaging in R&D, such as reduced costs in the long run. However, society, which is a third party, gains benefits when the firm engages in R&D. For example, other firms may be able to learn from the findings from this firm's R&D. Hence, society's total benefit, the MSB, is greater than the MPB. This is by the amount of the MEB, which is the marginal external benefit. Since QP is less than QS, the firm underproduces R&D activities, leading to an underallocation of resources. Between QP and QS, the marginal benefit to society is greater than the marginal cost. This means the societal welfare would have been gained by increasing the quantity of R&D up to the socially optimal output of QS. This foregone societal welfare is a deadweight loss. Now, I'll be handing the time over to Glenn.
Thanks, Silas. Now, I'll be moving on to solutions for solving the presence of positive externalities. One effective way to solve the issue of positive externalities is through subsidies. But before we get into the technical analysis, let's think of subsidies as an economic concept. If one were to implement a subsidy per unit on production that is equivalent to MEB, they would be able to lower the cost of production. And remember that the cost of production is a supply factor. As such, lowering COP increases supply for R&D. This causes quantity supplied to increase from QP to its socially optimal level, QS. Therefore, this results in an internalization of the externality and deadweight loss to be eliminated. Okay, now let's look at the nitty-gritty technical analysis and see how the graph movement allows us to visualize what had happened. When a subsidy is applied, MPC shifts from MPC 0 to MPC 1. This is because subsidies lower the MPC, which in this case refers to the lowering of cost of production. This results in a new equilibrium of MPC 1 equals to MPB. And if we now take a look at the intersection, we see that the new equilibrium is at QS. Of course, this is assuming that subsidy equals to MEB. As such, this means that the firm is now producing at a socially optimal quantity, and deadweight loss as well as market failure has been eliminated. That's great, isn't it? The reason why subsidies are fantastic is because it's flexible. It can be easily adjusted to the magnitude of the problem. So, if we want the firm to produce a lot more, we simply give them more subsidies and vice versa. Secondly, this prevents long-term decline of an industry because subsidies leverage on market forces and they do not need to spend beyond their budget to increase quantity supplied. However, with every solution, there are issues. Firstly, it's extremely difficult to find accurate information on the externality. It's almost impossible to estimate and quantify the exact amount of subsidy we have to give to the firm to produce exactly at QS. And secondly, there's a huge financial burden. Subsidies are provided through increased taxes on the people, and this is generally unpopular. But in general, subsidies are still often used to encourage firms to produce more because the benefits from the positive externalities usually outweighs its minimal costs. Now, I'll be passing my mic on to Dominic, who would run through negative externalities.
Thank you, Glenn. Let us now take a look at the cost-benefit graph of a market with negative externalities, the market for cigarettes. In this case, we will assume that the MPB is equal to the MSB. The benefits in this market is the utility that is derived from the consumption of cigarettes. The MPC is given by this line over here. This is the private cost to consumers of cigarettes, which include monetary costs and health costs. However, society, which is a third party, suffers costs when consumers consume cigarettes. The inhalation of secondhand smoke causes health costs to the people around. Hence, society's total cost, the MSC, is greater than the MPC. This is by the amount of the MEC, which is the marginal external cost. Since QP is greater than QS, the smoker overconsumes cigarettes, leading to an overallocation of resources. Between QP and QS, the marginal cost to society is greater than the marginal benefit to society. This means that societal welfare could have been improved by reducing the quantity of cigarettes consumed to the socially optimal output of QS. This foregone societal welfare is the deadweight loss, which is the area ABC. I will now be handing over the time to Lorraine.
Thank you, Dominic. To resolve this issue of negative externalities, tax and quota can be used to decrease the consumption to a socially optimal output. First, the government could impose a tax per unit on production that is equal to the marginal external cost. The tax increases the cost of production, and thus firms will cut down the supply of cigarettes. Consumers will now pay a higher price as they internalize the external cost in their decision making. Thus, MPC shifts from MPC 0 to MPC 1. Assuming the tax and rise in price are equal to MEC, the new equilibrium is now at MPC 1 equals to MPB, and the quantity consumed falls from QP to the socially optimal output QS, eliminating deadweight loss and correcting market failure. This method of taxation is useful since it increases government revenue, which could be used to finance economic, social, and community development projects. It can also be used for redistribution purposes, which will mitigate income inequality. Taxation also provides flexibility and financial incentives for behavioral changes, which is similar to subsidies. However, the effectiveness of taxation in reducing consumption is subject to the price elasticity of demand. If the demand of goods like cigarette is highly price inelastic, as shown with the red line, a larger increase in tax will be required to achieve the desired reduction in consumption, as compared to when the demand is relatively more price elastic. This makes it difficult for governments to impose taxes which are regressive. Furthermore, for the tax to work effectively, there must be accurate and complete information on the size of MEC. However, it is difficult to quantify externalities, especially in monetary terms. An over or underestimation of the size of MEC will lead to over or under taxation, causing the output consumed to be less or more than QS. This lack of knowledge could then result in government failure. Now, I'll pass the time to Mo In to explain more about quota.
Thank you, Lorraine. Next up, we have a production quota where the quantity produced can be limited via government legislation and regulation. Initially, we produce at the point MPC is equals to MSB to produce QP. This, however, results in a deadweight loss as shown by the shaded region. By restricting the quantity produced to QS, producers will have to reduce their production from QP to QS where MSC equals to MSB. This eliminates deadweight loss and corrects market failure. The advantages of a production quota is that it's simpler to implement as compared to market-based measures like tax, where there are technical difficulties involved in formulating a tax. It is thus easier to impose regulations and limit the quantity produced. Secondly, there is greater certainty in achieving the targeted level as production will definitely be restricted to the socially optimal output. However, the disadvantages of a production quota is that it displaces the market mechanism and the market will no longer respond to changes in price. In the absence of price signals, governments must best predict the socially desired level of production with imperfect information. A quantity lower or higher than the socially optimal output will still lead to market failure. Secondly, the enforcement of such laws is expensive and difficult. This is because constant checking is needed. Furthermore, for the law to be effective, penalties for breaking the law must be harsh enough. We have come to the end of our presentation on externalities. We hope that you learned something from this presentation. Thank you.